we're so excited to have Joe Tyson with us, all the way from chilly cold Washington, D.C. Joe Tyson is the Senior Vice President of Programs for Voices for America's Children. Voices is a membership organization representing 60 state and local members in 48 states, the District of Columbia, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Joe actually joined Voices in 2003 as Vice President of Policy. Prior to that, he served for 4 years as the Special Assistant to the President and CEO of Points of Light Foundation. He also served as the Executive Director and CEO of Taxpayers for Common Sense. On Capitol Hill, Joe was the Chief of Staff and the Legislative Director to Congressman Tim Penny, who is now retired, Legislative Director to U.S. Congresswoman Jan Harmon, Policy Director of the Blue Dog Democrats, Legislative Director to U.S. Congressman Colin C. Peterson. Joe provides strategic guidance and direction for Voices, public policy, and congressional and White House outreach efforts. Recognized for his experience in a wide array of domestic policy and federal budgetary issues, Joe has more than 20 years of experience in developing and advocating for critical legislative issues. Joe has spoken to children serving groups across the country for many years with an aim to increasing the effectiveness of advocates for our most precious national resource, our children and our youth. So as you can see from his bio, who more fitting than to give us the great tools of political advocacy than Joe Tyson. I welcome Joe to your panel.
Why do this work? We're going to be advocates, we're going to hone our skills, and we've got to think about why we do this work. Obviously, we care about kids, and hopefully we care about all kids. I think that's probably the thing. I suspect if we did a poll in here, that would probably be the reason most of us are here today. Most of us do the work we do, however we're doing it. We worry about our nation's future. It's overused. It's usually used by politicians who don't want to deal with the underlying issues but want to talk and bromides. Kids are our future. We got to do right by our kids. But it is true. They are our future. And if we're not doing right by our kids, the country itself is going to suffer. We worry about declining public investment. Somebody brought that up earlier today. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But nationally, and this is true, I suspect, in most states, I've seen some state data, not all of it, as a percentage of public investments in the last 20, 30 years, resources going to kids are going down, not up. We see systems change as critical. Now, it's an important point. I don't want to belabor it. But a lot of what we will address in our work, as children's advocates, is around, in specific communities, around in specific systems, local issues. But if you really think about it, whether you're doing it locally, state level, or nationally, we're not going to have the kind of impact we want, bring about the kind of broad-based changes we want without systems change. Changing these systems is critical. A better public education system, a better child care system, a better way to deliver mental health services, a better way, name it. These are all systems. These systems are embedded in the way that kids are dealt with in the country today. And if we want to have an impact, we have to bake into our advocacy, however we do it, wherever we do it, systems change. Overcoming poverty is not a task of charity. It is an act of justice. like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is man-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the action of human beings. Sometimes it falls on a generation to be great. You can be that generation. Let your greatness blossom. Important point there. No one is born in, people are born into poverty settings, but it's not natural. And there's no reason, except we don't have the right policies and resources going to the right places with the right signs and supports to have the kind of numbers. Poverty can be changed by men. Okay. Yes. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
This statement, I think, there's probably not a person in the room that believes it. And I think actually it's absolutely counter to the culture and mentality of every policymaker in this country who in fact view poverty as charity. That's why their response is, rather than public investment, let's let the churches take care of it. And essentially, you know, we haven't moved far away from still treating children as property. And, you know, the idea that the parents are responsible for that child and that the state or public has no business butting into families, essentially. So how do we, I mean, I think, you know, that is not a outlier mentality. That is the norm that we are up against every day. So how do we get people to actually not only read this, but the people that are in charge that we have to deal with actually believe it?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. We're going to hopefully get to some skills, and especially some things around messaging. But I'm sure everyone in this room has heard some version of, well, you know, if they don't have health care, that's their fault. Why don't they go get a job? You know, why do they you know, they live like that in those conditions because that's their choice. You're right, those are very deeply embedded. It's changing, I think. Interesting. Put an article, there were a couple of pieces from the New York Times last week. One talked about, again, we're not going to talk about this today a lot. We'll talk about a little bit in terms of the messaging around investment. But in the 1970s, Congress came this close as a country to setting up a universal pre-K child care system that would be an entitlement. It passed the Congress. It was the Mondale-Bradamus law. President Nixon vetoed it. And part of the reason, if you go back and read his veto statements, goes to this point you were just making, that we don't want to turn over to government the care of our kids. And it's a good point. I don't have a good answer, except that I think it's changing. And I think it's our job to point out the realities. We can deal with some of these intractable problems. Part of it is changing the language and the way that we do talk about it, though. Types of advocacy. Now, we're not going to dive deep into each of these, but I do want to talk a little bit about the different types of advocacy. Because I think sometimes people think advocacy is like packing up the station wagon and driving to Tallahassee. But that is one form of advocacy, and it's an important one, but it's not the only one. Some of you may work with clients. You're either in the social welfare system or you're in another system where you are dealing day in, day out with people with children or perhaps without. Client advocacy. Working with those families for something better for them. Working the systems for them. How many of you have kind of pushed the door a little bit on these systems to get something to happen? It doesn't happen sometimes. I'll tell you, I've met a lot of creative social workers. leaders. And it's amazing what they can do in these very difficult systems with diminished resources, but they do it every day for their clients, people they serve. Legislative advocacy, again, whether that's state, local, or national, important part of administrative advocacy, sometimes called regulatory advocacy, being part of writing the regulations that govern these laws, electoral advocacy. This one really scares some folks, especially those that are public employees or in systems, because they are concerned about their 501c3 status or being in violation of things like the Hatch Act or other laws, state and federal, that prohibit political activities by either public employees or by organizations that receive public funds. But it's an important thing. And that during the last election, for example, Voices organized in 23 states around a campaign of the importance of public investments for kids. And there are things you can do that are not political acts. You're not, where you run into some trouble is when you start endorsing candidates or giving money to political candidates. But if you stay away from those and you simply are educating candidates, both Democrats, Republicans, Independents, on the importance of the issues, you're educating media who are writing stories, you're organizing events, forums,